Good afternoon and welcome to the Caregiver Teleconnection. My name is Glenda Rogers and I'm going to be your facilitator for today's session with Dr. Tam Cummings. And we are going to just answer questions that you may have this afternoon. Our session today is sponsored by Vitas Healthcare. And Vitas, we're so glad that they are helpful to us, but they provide hospice services nationwide. They're in 13 states, including Texas, California, and Florida. And Tam always has wonderful things to say about hospice care and about Vitas. So why don't you do that before I introduce you?
Well, hospice care is so many times I see it and it's in place the final day. And the process of actively dying is actually 9 months. And that's when we want hospice care in use. Your tax dollars pay for it. It's there. It's an extra layer of professional care. And Glenda, yesterday, before everybody signed on, Glenda told me where she was. She's up in Dallas, and I was in Dallas yesterday. And the community I was in, they asked me to, the hospice team asked me to come meet with a family whose mother was actively dying. I believe she passed in the evening. But the hospice nurse was so comforting to them. And the hospice caregiver was so giving to them. I mean, these are good people, and Vitas does a great job. Our hospice people are blessed because we call on them in one of the hardest parts of life. And so don't be afraid if your loved one is declining to ask your physician for a hospice order. If your loved one meets the criteria, you get you a hospice nurse, a hospice pastor, a hospice social worker, a hospice caregiver who comes to the home or community your loved one is in 3 times a week, just simply to bathe them. So it is care that we want you to get in contact with and use. Go hospice. They're great folks. Okay, Glenda, thank you. You good, Glenda? Glenda froze. Okay, so Glenda froze, and I'll just tell you, I'm Dr. Cummings. I'm a gerontologist, and I specialize in dementia. And one of the ways we sort of decide what we're going to talk about in these sessions is based on what either Glenda or I have actually experienced, usually in the last month. And if I get several phone calls or emails that are similar to one another, then I call Glenda and I ask Glenda what she thinks about that as a topic, and we discuss it and we go from there. And so in the past month, I've had multiple phone calls on 2 specific things. And Glenda, in an odd way, they're sort of tied together because Lewy body dementia many times has a sexual component to it, with the hallucination that can happen where the person with Lewy bodies is hallucinating that they're caregiver or their spouse is having sex in public, is having sex with multiple people, that there's wild parties going on, but there's a sexual component to it. And in the case of men having Lewy body, having that specific hallucination, Glenda, it's not unusual that they actually get a calendar and write down the dates and times their wife will have sex with them. And as you can imagine, that's stressful. But I had multiple calls on wives of men who had Lewy bodies. And at the same time, I had multiple conversations with family spouse caregivers about intimacy, the loss of intimacy, what one person saw as the failure of intimacy. And so I thought that's sort of what we would talk about today. So what you want to go with first, Glenda? I do think Glenda might be frozen. Can you hear me, Glenda?
Well, what I saw was that you were frozen.
Oh, I saw that you were frozen. Did everybody hear me? Can y'all let Glenda know?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. So should we do Lewy bodies first? Okay. Lewy bodies occurs when a protein that lives in the brain that's named for Dr. Lewy somehow works its way into the nucleus to the cell of the in the brain. And you've got to remember, every time we talk about dementia, your loved one, you and I, have 100 billion neurons, and we have 400 billion glial cells that attend to those neurons. And then the glial cells have glia, microglia, that attend to them. You've got to always remember that the brain has 100,000 miles of blood vessels flowing through it. And you're talking about blood vessels that are smaller than a strand of hair. That's why a person could have multiple TIAs, transient ischemic attacks. And it's only when there have been multiples that it has an effect on the person, because the damage is so tiny. That's why dementias move so slowly, is because of the thickness and richness of the brain. You've got to always remember that it's not that you have one file on the word banana, it's that you have thousands of banana files. And if you have thousands of files on what bananas mean, how many files do you have on the word mother or mom or mama? How many mothers, mamas do you know? So you always have to start the conversation with understanding how complex the brain is to begin with, and that every brain, while being the same, is uniquely different because it holds and makes your personality. It makes you who you are, and me who I am, and Glenda who she is. And one of the terrible things about dementias is they are terminal diseases of the brain. And for the most part, they don't affect a personality. They don't change it. They just sort of enhance it. There are a few dementias where personality is definitely impacted, the frontal temporal dementias, because of damage in the frontal lobes. But Lewy body dementia is different. And because Lewy body dementias present so differently, Glenda, I've been a gerontologist for 34 years. The most common complaint, concern, and story filled with agony that I hear always comes from the spouse of a person with Lewy bodies. And the reason begins with something called fluctuating cognition. Because of how the Lewy body protein is moving in and around the neurons, the person either can think clearly or they can't. And on the day that we take our loved ones to see the doctor, the chances are you got them up, you got them showered, you got them dressed, you got them fed, you got them looking really good, not the way they normally look. You've got them all dressed up without even realizing it. You're not letting the doctor see what they truly look like. Then you got them in the car, you drove through traffic, that caused brain chemistry to fly. Then you got them to the doctor's office, and the doctor came in the doctor uniform, and the doctor began the social conversation and said, well, hi, how are you? And your loved one immediately responded with their learned social conversation of, oh, I'm fine, how are you? And you wanted to just kick them. And you didn't even realize that you sort of helped with the fluctuating cognition that morning because of all the effort you put into getting them to the doctor. But the other thing, Glenda, is the family caregiver is trying desperately to explain these very subtle, odd changes in their loved one that only a neurologist specializing in dementia or a geriatrician or a dementia testing center would really recognize. I often find families aren't even aware that there is a Lewy Body Dementia Association.org. It's lbda.org, and they have wonderful information. Families don't know, Glenda, to go to nih.gov and put in Lewy Body Dementia Handbook, and you can either order them or you can print out a PDF of it. But it's about a 40-page booklet that's one of the best pieces of information you can get about Lewy bodies. But over and over, what the spouse reports is that she's tried desperately, Glenda, typically for 5 to 8 years. She has tried to tell the doctor, to get the doctor to see that something was wrong. And the overwhelming response that she gets back from their family doctor is that something's actually wrong with her. And so in 1 month, I met a woman whose husband had been the county vet, and she tried for 5 years until that doctor told her that she was crazy. There was nothing wrong with her husband. Another woman called me in the same week, Glenda, with the same story. Her husband was somebody everybody in town knew. He'd known the doctor forever. And in spite of all of the things she tried to point out, the doctor told her, you need mental health attention. You're just crazy. The next woman called Glenda, and the doctor said, there's nothing wrong with your husband, but you need marriage counseling. The fourth lady that called me, Glenda, and this was all last month when you and I talked, the fourth lady that called me had been told that she needed counseling. And so the very person you're reaching out to for care doesn't have the skill set to recognize what you're trying to explain to them. And I realize it doesn't just happen in dementia, but dementia is our field, Glenda. So it causes me great concern. And for family members, nobody tells them that if there's cognition issues first and then movement disorder, then that's Lewy bodies. If it is movement disorder first, trouble with coordination, and then cognition issues, that's Parkinson's. But what so many families don't understand is Lewy bodies is now the umbrella over Parkinson's disease dementia. So if a person has Lewy bodies, first of all, you want to know which form of Lewy bodies, because there's several domains. Which form do they have? And then you want to know, has Parkinson's started yet? And then your next question is, has Alzheimer's started? Because so much more has been learned in the last few years. And because Parkinson's been moved under the Lewy body umbrellas, what that means is if you see one of those dementias, you should see the other one in time. And if you're paying close attention, Alzheimer's is a first cousin of Lewy bodies, and Alzheimer's joins as well. And I think, Glenda, that one of the reasons family members have so much trouble getting the doctor to understand what's happening is they don't understand, to use the term, fluctuating cognition. They don't know to explain that they have kicking and punching behavior in the night. That's REM, sleep behavior disorder. It's all capital letters, REM, which means rapid eye movement, sleep disorder. That's, Glenda, what you and I refer to as deep sleep. And because of damage in the brain, the person with Lewy body actually acts out their dreams. So if they dream they're fighting, they punch out in the bed. If they dream they're running, they kick and run in the bed. I was at a conference last week, and one of the guest speakers was a gentleman with Lewy body who had spent his life working as an attorney. He had been to 7 neurologists, Glenda, because he knew something was wrong with him, and he kept insisting on seeking additional care. And they finally ended up at the Mayo Clinic with a neurologist who was a specialist. So it's not the neurologist, it's a neurologist who's a specialist in dementia that has to be located first. And that's typically going to be at a dementia testing center, would be where you would find that. But because these family members because these family members didn't know to go to lbda.org, because they didn't know what this dementia was, they just knew that something was different. Every one of them had researched dementia, which, what is like 19 trillion hits. And they had tried Alzheimer's, because that's the dementia you hear about. And they weren't able to locate the information to point them in the Lewy body direction. And the doctor is more accustomed to looking for somebody who presents as a person with Alzheimer's dementia. And because in Alzheimer's, the hippocampus is dying very early in the disease, and the hippocampus is what lets you make memory. And when the hippocampus dies, Glenda, I begin to ask you the same question over and over and over again. And I repeat the same story over and over and over again. And as the hippocampus begins to die, it may take me 45 minutes before I repeat that story. As the hippocampus no longer exists, I repeat the question within seconds of having just asked it. But in Lewy body's dementia, the hippocampus doesn't die. And in Lewy body's dementia, the person understands something is wrong with them, whereas in the person with Alzheimer's, they're not aware that something's going on. That's why that man kept going to more doctors. He knew he wasn't getting the right answer. He also happened to be an attorney who specialized in medicine. So he had a bigger background in not being intimidated by one doctor not giving him the answer he wanted. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Can I ask you a question before you move forward? On the REM sleep disorder, I had talked to you about a friend of mine whose husband has Lewy body. Does that also end up like he would wake up in the middle of the night seeing snakes and stuff, or is that a hallucination?
That's the hallucination. Now, there
Mm.
tend to be 4 common hallucinations in Lewy bodies, and the sexual one doesn't get told to the doctor, even though it should set off alarm bells because it's such a unique hallucination. And the family doesn't talk about it because of the shame of the parent or the spouse talking about sex that way. And because it is very disruptive, it's very abrupt, it's very in your face and direct, and it's very graphic. So the first hallucination is, and these aren't in any, it doesn't mean they occur in this order. These are just my numbers for them. Hallucination 1 is they see children. Hallucination 2 is they see bugs, spiders, rats, or snakes, and they're crawling on them and biting them. Hallucination number 3 is they see bad people coming to get them. And Glenda, that's been everything from a man who fully believed his son and his cousin were killing him, that they were coming to get him. A woman that I knew who every day believed her cousin came and beat her up because that's what she saw and felt. And then the 4th hallucination is that they see their spouse or their caregiver having sex out in public, even though they're sitting right there in the recliner, through the wall in the bedroom. They can see it happening there. And as you can imagine, for females, it's upsetting, but for men, it is especially upsetting. And yet those 4 hallucinations may occur all 4 in a person with Lewy bodies. They may only have one of them. The hallucination may simply be that they see a baby that sleeps under their bed, and the staff called me and I said, well, if there was a baby under the bed, what would you do? And they said, we'd put a pallet down. I said, so make a pallet and put it under the bed. So they put down a little quilt folded and put a pillow there and a little blanket, and the little lady was happy because she could now see the baby had a cover over it. So sometimes it's a hallucination that's easy to address, but things like bugs, spiders, rats, and snakes crawling us and biting us, the family may not even realize that that's what the hallucination is, that they're actually hearing a hallucination, that they see children. They may think, well, the grandchildren were just here, or she was a school teacher, or that she taught Bible study or something with little kids, or we had a bunch of kids. But that's not it. It's seeing children that aren't there or babies that aren't there. And the bad people coming to get me, I've seen cousin Bubba comes and beats me up. Brother and sister or cousin are coming to get me. My son's coming to kill me, to everything that sounds like a SWAT team coming or an army team, a police team coming to get them. So it's the common theme is somebody's in the house that's not supposed to be here, or somebody's around the house trying to get in. And then the last one is believing the spouse or the caregiver's having sex. And I had a grandson in a meeting, and he was a fully grown man. And I asked, are you also seeing this hallucination? And he got the giggles because he was so embarrassed to say grandpa was saying these things. And I think sometimes families forget there's nothing you can tell a doctor the doctor hasn't heard before. There's nothing you can tell people in memory care or senior living that we haven't heard before. And so many times these behaviors that seem embarrassing or feel embarrassing to you or are annoying to you, or you want them to stop doing it, they're all driven by brain damage. But you have to remember they're also clues to the type of dementia your loved one has. Now, one of the women that called me saw a neurologist in a large city, and the neurologist identified the REM sleep behavior disorder. And then he's the one that told her she needed to go to counseling. you would think that light bulbs would be going off, that REM, sleep behavior disorder, is a key feature of Lewy body's dementia, and the wife is describing several of the other clinical features. And instead, dragging his feet and whining about it to her, he agreed to go ahead and send the man on to the testing center for dementia, and they identified Lewy bodies right away. And I asked the wife, I said, did you send him, I don't know, a dozen dead roses as a thank you? And she said, no, she actually sent him the most polite thank you she could imagine writing. And you could tell that right behind it was a real hard, bless his heart. But
Mhm.
instead, she sent him a thank you, thanking him for getting her husband to the right doctor with the education to be able to identify on the very first visit that this man had Lewy body's dementia. So she felt like she got her zing back in. But in the meantime, she had dealt with all this guilt. And, family member begins to get paranoid that maybe the doctor's right. Maybe I am the crazy one. And then that takes a toll on you. And then if your loved one has the sexual hallucination, now you're being accosted for sex all the time. And that may be a great thing. That may be something that's driving you out of your mind because he just won't stop. And so those were conversations that I had in the last month. And then because of the intimacy component, a couple of those conversations involved questions about intimacy. And then there were several conversations where family members were calling to talk about intimacy. So, Glenda, when I was a young social worker, back when you were still a tot, when I was a young social worker, the administrator asked me if I would do an in-service for the staff on sex among the residents. And they would give me 30 minutes to do the presentation. And I said, I need like 10 seconds. And she said, no, seriously, we'll give you a half an hour. And I said, no, really, I need like 10 seconds. They're humans. They'll get it. She said, well, what could you possibly teach the staff about sex between the residents of the community in 10 seconds? And I said, it's simple. Old ain't dead.
Yep. There it is.
Old ain't dead. If you liked sex when you were 20, guess what? You will enjoy sex when you're 80. Maybe a little different, maybe a little slower, but you will still enjoy sex. Human beings are sexual beings. The secondary function of much of our organ systems, Glenda, are actually sexual. The first function of skin is to protect your body from infection. The second function of skin is sexual. The first function of the tongue is to move and swallow food. The second function of the tongue is considered sexual, and it's the same with the lips and the eyes and all the other parts of the body. So humans are sexual. Humans enjoy sex. If they didn't, there wouldn't be more people. We'd run out, right?
Yep.
How they tricked most of you into being moms. It felt. And so what can happen in intimacy is several things. There can be confusion on the part of your loved one into thinking that you're not the person that they're married to. And because they're going backwards in time through their file cabinet, if you got married when you were 17, 18, 19, and your husband now thinks he's 20, well, you're too old to be his wife, so maybe you're his mother. And he's looking for a younger woman. And so he may reach out to a younger aide at the community. And what's interesting, Glenda, is it's typically done towards somebody that actually looks like their loved one. That's interesting. And that was one of the things I was in the community in Dallas for, was there had been issues with a new resident in memory care who had really spotted and fixated on a gentleman in memory care. And the gentleman's wife came to visit, and the gentleman's wife actually yelled at the woman in memory care, "That's my husband. You stay away from my husband. You leave him alone." And when the staff told me this, I thought, okay, now we need to talk to her again because she's not understanding. The woman has dementia. She just got mad at a lady hitting on her husband who has brain damage and isn't even aware that that's what she's doing. And so we had to do a little more education with her to help her. But there's things that can happen where there's just confusion. you look like somebody I love. And so you must be the person I love. And so now I want to hold your hand and sit next to you. There can be conflict in a community because he now believes that that woman is his wife, and that woman got up and went over here, and he wants her to come back and sit over here. And so he'll actually go get her and try to pull her back to the chair or wherever she is, or be angry that she's not sitting by him and is moving around the community. And so he'll actually slowly chase her around the community, trying to catch up with her, and get angry if she doesn't sit next to him at dinner, get angry if she doesn't recognize this spousal commitment that he does. You can have residents who fall in love with each other and are both married to other people. And it's not that they're cheating on you, it's brain damage. And I can promise you that something about the person they fell in love with is very similar to you. There are residents and spouses, male spouses, who might be interested in being intimate, but if they now think they're 20 and they look at you and think you're 70, they're not going to be interested in that sexual relation right there because you're too old for them. And so one woman was concerned because she said her husband always liked to do this particular thing. And when she went to do that particular thing to him, he got very upset and agitated and didn't want her to do that. And so it could simply be that her husband now has the mental capacity of someone so much younger than her that trying to have an intimate act with him is more like trying to have an intimate act with a child. Does that make sense, Glinda?
Yeah, sadly, yeah, it does. But brain damage is the key thing you have to remember.
And that's so difficult. And I get it. That's so difficult. And I think what we forget is we're at the tail end of a generation of people that never slept alone. And they didn't grow up in 6-bedroom houses with 7 bathrooms. They grew up in 2 and 3-bedroom houses. They grew up in 1,400 square feet, and they all shared a bathroom, but they also shared beds. I shared a bed with a sister. I shared, my brother shared a room. My other sister shared a room. I mean, we shared rooms. And in these families, you found that people, when you look at generational studies, people grew up sleeping next to someone and then left their parents' house to get married and begin sleeping with someone. And now they've been sleeping next to someone for 50 years. But when you add in the totality of their life, they've actually been sleeping next to someone their entire life. And so to suddenly have that removed, that warm body removed from being next to you, can cause behaviors to happen and can cause the person to feel like they're not being loved. You may not be able to sleep with a person with Lewy body, Glinda, because of the punching and the hitting. The gentleman who spoke talked about they realized he had REM sleep behavior disorder when he gave his wife a black eye because he was being attacked, and he swung out like this and popped her right in the eye. Said he had to really talk sweet to her to get her to come back to bed with him ever again. But it was part of the disease. I talked to a woman who was upset because her husband couldn't have an erection. And I asked immediately, how many blood thinners is he on? And it dawned on her then, he's on 3 separate blood thinners. The man will never be able to have an erection. But she said, but you know, that doesn't mean we can't cuddle. And I said, you're right. She said, it doesn't mean we can't spoon. It doesn't mean we can't kiss. And it doesn't mean you can't do any of those things until the person with dementia responds negatively. So one of the things we see, Glinda, that is usually of a concern in the community is when we have a husband who comes to visit his wife to have sex with her. And we certainly want them to be intimate. We want them to do that. But we also have to recognize with her as well, her memories going back at time. And so we may have a wife who fights off her husband. Remember, a wife with dementia will wake up, see the man in the bed next to her, Glinda, and call 911 because there's an old man in her bed. that wife of 50 years because of dementia may think that man she's known all her life who's trying to be intimate with her now is an old man trying to attack her or hurt her. And we all have to remember that long before we had sex, we were being taught a message socially, familially, from our family, from our religious or spiritual beliefs. We don't allow people to touch us in certain places. And that started very early in our lives. And it started way before sex began for us. So it's a deeply planted memory. It's very long term. So husbands may feel hurt because their wife that they love so dearly and are simply wanting to have this intimate moment with one more time may become frightened, may call the police, may try to push him out of bed, may try to run out of the room, may actually fight him. And again, you have to remember, like so many of the behaviors in dementia, it's because of brain damage. It's not that she stopped loving you. For families who have a person with frontal temporal dementia, intimacy ends very early because the area of the brain that holds the sex files is one of the first things destroyed. And with that goes empathy, and with that goes telling the family member that I love them. And so when we see behavioral variant FTD, for example, then you see typically somebody who's divorced, Glenda, because they weren't intimate with their loved one. And the wife thought, he doesn't love me anymore, so I should divorce him. He doesn't tell the kids he loves them. He doesn't seem to care about any of us. And that's exactly what frontal temporal dementia would look like. In Lewy body's dementia, one of the big scary components is a sudden crash in depression that occurs in Lewy bodies. And that may be missed by the doctor, but that depression is also going to affect whether that person will be intimate or can be fully intimate with their loved one. So there's all sorts of things that are happening that are affecting the level of intimacy, the type of intimacy, the enjoyment of the intimacy. And, you know, as humans, being intimate with our lover, with our partner, with our spouse is an integral part of our happiness, of our longevity. I mean, the real reason married men live longer is not that the wife was a good cook. It's the touch to the skin. It's the intimacy. And we don't want spouses that we don't not want intimacy. We just want people to be safe and to understand what's happening when they are being intimate with their loved one. Because Glenda, if you always had black hair and now you have snow white hair, then that man may literally not recognize you as his wife. He may think you're his mother-in-law. And we all know that if a son takes home a mother who now thinks the son is her husband, that mother's going to be really upset when she realizes the son goes to bed every night with that other younger woman. And that means he's actually brought the strumpet home with him. So it's not just the physical act of intimacy, there are all sorts of sexual things that happen in dementia. Does that help anybody?
Yeah. Well, I hope so. We have several questions. Are you ready to start on those?
Sure, go for it.
I'll start with, let's do. Yeah, Anne Marie had a couple of questions, but I'm going to start with the second one first, Anne Marie. She says, my loved one with Lewy body has started repeating questions often multiple times in a 5-minute period. You said this was a sign of that Alzheimer's has likely joined the Lewy body. Is this due to damage to the hippocampus for Lewy people? Kind of a complex question.
When the Lewy body person begins to repeat themselves, it would mean that Alzheimer's has now joined Lewy bodies, that your person now has multiple dementias, and that the reason they're repeating the information is that the piece of the brain that receives new information and puts it into memory, that piece no longer exists. So it would be like a car without a battery. The car looks like it run, the tires are aired up, I've got a key to it, but when I turn the key, nothing happens. And it's because you don't have the battery. The battery's not there anymore. And so the person is not able to do the things that they would normally do. And the way that we know it's the hippocampus is it's the piece of the brain that does memory. And we know that when a person doesn't have it, the sign of it is that they constantly repeat themselves. And so when it's not at all unusual that when families get a diagnosis, nobody's told them to expect multiple dementias or that there is a possibility of multiple dementias. Alzheimer's, it's believed, will join any dementia if the person lives long enough. And it is just not uncommon for a person to have more than one dementias. So as you learn the clinical features of the 9 common dementias, if you see one behavior that belongs to vascular dementia, then vascular dementia, some sort of stroke, something has happened. If you see something that looks like Alzheimer's, then it's Alzheimer's. And so it's just that families oftentimes are not prepared, that it's not at all unusual to expect multiple dementias in a loved one. And repetition of questions is the classic feature of Alzheimer's dementia.
Okay.
Right.
For Lewy body, is it likely that that is going to be fluctuating also, or is that going to behave as it does in Alzheimer's?
It will, his decline will be different because he'll be aware that he's declining. He'll try to stand even when he knows he can't stand, but he'll know hang on to the side of the door, whereas an Alzheimer's person wouldn't know that. 2 terminal diseases in the brain is one of the reasons why Lewy body is such an aggressive dementia. The person is typically younger. Death in Lewy bodies is typically about 2 weeks of being bedbound, not a year or anything like that. And they're pretty aware until the Alzheimer's starts. And then the Alzheimer's begins and it's just more damage in different areas of the brain moving at a different speed. So it's the fluctuating cognition is one of the early signs of Lewy bodies. But as more and more of the brain becomes damaged, there's no more fluctuating cognition. There's just an inability to properly conceive and understand the world and the environment around them.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Anne Marie also wanted to know, how can I know when my loved one is within the 6 to 9 months suitable for asking for hospice assessment? Is that where taking temperature, weight, monthly comes in?
Well, you can go to the website and you can download the DBAT. And on the DBAT, there's even a breakout box in stage 3 for Lewy bodies. Lewy bodies, people accuse their family and loved one of stealing from them in stage 3. In the other dementias, that's a stage 5 behavior. But you can stage your person based on the behaviors that you see them doing, and that will tell you how advanced the disease process is. And I can tell you, if you're on a phone call with me and Glenda, they're probably already in stage 5. And that's just because in our country, that's when families realize I got to figure out something. And that's typically when they're able to find the help and information they're looking for. So I wouldn't expect you, Anne Marie, to be on this call if your loved one was early. I would assume the disease is more advanced. But as you go through and look, you'll see stages 5, 6, and 7. 7 is a bedbound person. Stage 6 is a person who actually looks sick and is shuffling, doesn't have much language left. This person could not fool someone, but stage 5 people don't look sick. And because they don't look sick, that is what fools people. It's not the person with dementia doing something on purpose. It's the rest of us not realizing that there's something wrong with this person. Because humans think, Glenda, that if I'm sick, I look sick. And in dementia, you don't look sick until you lose a whole pound of brain tissue. And so things that the doctor will be looking for are going to be 3 months of weight loss in a row, unintentionally, loss of language skills, great changes in ability to have coordinated muscle movement, to be able to move around. And you can just ask your physician and they'll know. And they'll tell you when they think it's time. And then you don't have to pick the first hospice company. You can pick anyone you want. Pick the company that you feel like you connected with best. And they'll begin to get services to you right away.
Okay. So I should begin probably looking for those organizations now so that when that time comes, I'm already ready.
Yeah, you won't have to look for them. As soon as the doctor writes the hospice order, they'll come find you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can talk to communities, to memory care communities, and ask who they like, who they use for your particular area. VITAS isn't everywhere, although it seems like they're getting there. But talk to local nursing facilities, talk to the hospital, ask who they like. I mean, you know, look at reviews, and
Well,
you can narrow it down.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Are you with me, Glenda? Okay, does somebody else have a question?
I'm showing Tam as being frozen. Is anybody else seeing that?
I'm showing you as being frozen.
Now you're back. Okay.
And now you're back.
Aphasia and Lewy body.
Aphasia is the inability to use and understand language or speech or sound. And it means that the temporal lobes are damaged. And the temporal lobes are these lobes right here. And that's where hearing and language are. And once those become damaged, then the person develops what is called medically aphasia.
Okay, good. Brittany wants to know, when you speak about hallucination, it reminds me of a gentleman who I cared for in a memory care facility. Anytime we would tell him his son was coming to visit, he would get very anxious and fearful, which led to challenging behaviors.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. If you believe that somebody's coming through the door who's going to hurt you, you're not going to be happy. So that makes perfect sense. I know that when I teach in communities, when I get to Lewy bodies, Glenda, I have to stop and wait for the staff because they are punching each other in the arm going, I told you that wasn't Alzheimer's. I told you that guy saw children, because they've seen these behaviors. It's just no one told them what they were seeing, that it was actually a sign of this particular form of dementia.
Yeah.
So that's probably exactly what you were witnessing.
Yeah. Anouk wanted to know, is the treatment for Lewy body the same as for Parkinson's?
It varies. They get some medication that's different. Both Parkinson's and Lewy body people are very, very sensitive to any other medications. Parkinson's person gets the dopamine. Lewy bodies gets a different thing, but there is a specific non-typical antipsychotic made for Lewy body and Parkinson's disease dementia called Nuplazid, and that's Nuplazid, and it stops the hallucination behavior. And Glenda, what you want to come away from this and understand is those hallucinations are not a few seconds. They go on for hours. And as a social worker, it was the first time I'd ever seen it. And it was a little lady who was bedbound. And every day her cousin Bubba came and beat her up. Every day rattlesnakes crawled on the floor.
Yeah.
Every day children came in the room and made so much noise it would just aggravate her to death. And she knew good and well there was sex going on everywhere. Now, we were in a nursing home, and yeah, there was sex going on everywhere, but not the way she thought of it, because remember, old ain't dead. And her hallucinations were so terrible. And we didn't even know, there wasn't even a name for what she had back then, Glenda. We had no idea that she had Lewy bodies, and there certainly wasn't medication for it. But what we did do is we kept a broom at the door of her room, and every staff member who came by would say, how are you doing, Miss Ellie? And if she screamed, there's snakes on the floor, they would take the broom and they would beat the floor until she said, okay, we got all the snakes. And you're talking about this happened 30 or 40 times a day. A staff member would stop their chores to go do what needed to be done to keep her feeling as safe as possible. Every day we had to call the sheriff to come arrest Uncle Bubba. So these are scary hallucinations that are happening. A lot of times the children one is just that there's children, then they're usually not annoying. Sometimes they are annoying, Glenda. They won't get off my lap. They won't get off my bed, so I can't go to bed. But these are all things that are part of brain damage. And it's what's unique to me is how it's the same set of 4 hallucinations over and over again, although there are variations.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm, terrible disease. Meredith had an interesting question. Is hyperfocus a characteristic of dementia? My mother has spells that she doesn't feel well, and only having Yoplait yogurt makes her feel better. She's eaten 6 cartons in a couple of days. A couple of months ago, it was that no bra I found was comfortable, and she went through a dozen. Now she never mentions it. It is wearing the same bra she wore for months before this came up. Her diagnosis is vascular dementia.
Okay, that's why you're seeing such odd things. She'll have moments, hours, or days where she appears normal, and then moments, hours, days, and weeks where she does something that makes no sense at all. And it's because if you think about her brain being a file cabinet, everywhere the strokes have hit, they've destroyed files. The Alzheimer's person file cabinet is going from 2023 back down to I want to go home and I'm a little kid. Your mother's file cabinet has chunks and holes taken out of it where the strokes have come in and killed different areas. And that's why her behavior is different. And for vascular families, it's very, very stressful, Glenda, because one moment this person seems normal and you think, oh, it's me. Oh, it's not as bad as I thought it was. Oh, she'll be okay for a little bit longer. And then the next moment you're dealing with somebody who's completely not cognizant. And so it's very, very stressful for families. That's a great description of what a vascular dementia person looks like. And yogurt's not bad for her. If she's got a terminal brain disease, let her have some yogurt. She'll be fine.
Can you repeat the name of the medication you just mentioned a minute ago?
It's Nuplazid.
No, I can't. I don't have it.
Nuplazid. And Glenda, when it first came out, it was horribly expensive. So if it still is, people would contact the pharmaceutical rep and they were able to fill out paperwork to help people get a reduced cost on it. So I don't know what it cost yet, but it is the medication that was developed for that hallucination series.
All right. I'm trying to put that in the chat box. Okay. And one other question. Karen says, have you worked with families or patients who are participating in clinical trials? How did it impact their lives? And clinical trials are so important.
Yes, clinical trials are important and we have to have them, but I'm greedy and I would never do that with my loved one. You don't know if you're getting the placebo or not. And then it becomes an issue of you're dragging that person with dementia back to a doctor to do something else and then dragging them back home again. And a lot of times as the disease progresses, it puts a terrible strain on the family caregiver. And it's a terrible strain on the person with dementia. Now, a lot of the times the folks that I'm seeing, they may have to travel 6 hours to go to that research center and do their piece for that week. So it can be really, really draining. I think it varies really from family to family. I've known so many families that were going to have their loved one's brain autopsied. And when they got to the end and realized what the end of dementia actually looks like, they didn't want anything else done to their loved one because the disease had done enough. And so I think it's really I think it's a person by person decision. I applaud those that do it. It's just, I work so much with the end stage of dementia, and because I know what's coming, it's just not something I would plan for my loved one. But I totally understand. We have to have research. We have to have people willing to do that. And God bless y'all for doing it. But it's a hard decision to make, and it's a hard thing for you because the stress never gets less. It just continues to build until you finally have to make your medical decision and make the move for your loved one. And so I just see it as one more thing the family caregiver has to do that you just don't get support and care for the way a cancer person would get. And That's just the reality of dementia care in our country. So I applaud you for doing it. You're absolutely right. We got to have it. It's so important. I don't think I could do it.
Yeah. Um, I guess, let me go back here a minute. Judith wanted to know, what is DBAT? I don't guess she's been with us when we've done our series starting at the beginning. So just explain that a little bit for Judith.
It's DBAT that flies from under the bridge into Austin. It's why people go to Austin, Texas. They want to see DBAT.
Yeah.
The Dementia Behavioral Assessment Tool, and it's based on Reisberg's tool from 1970. It's just a greatly updated and enhanced version. It has behaviors on there that allow you to recognize if your loved one is doing that behavior, then it means they're in this stage of dementia. And if they're in this stage of dementia, it means they've lost this much brain tissue, and it means this is what their mental equivalency is. And so the purpose of the staging tool is to allow you to see where your loved one is now, because you have to make plans financially and emotionally, right, Glenda?
Oh, absolutely.
And it tells you what behaviors are going to come next. Now, person whose loved one had vascular dementia, when you do the DBAT, you're going to be all over 4, 5, and 6. You'll be back and forth, but the other dementias, they just go down the slippery slope. So you won't check off everything. Not everybody sundowns. Other people start sundowning in stage 3. So it's just a general guideline to help you figure out where your loved one actually is. And Glenda, I grade harder than other people do because it's not my mother, it's not my loved one, it's not my dad. I'm clinical. So I'm usually about a half a stage in front of you. And here's an example. Glenda, you're either incontinent or you can get to the bathroom every time and don't need to be reminded. If you have accidents, you're incontinent. In most of the dementias, the person will become incontinent of bladder in stage 5 and incontinent of bowel in stage 6. Many times people with vascular dementia become incontinent of bowel first, followed by incontinency of bladder. And so everything is ultimately destroyed during the course of the disease.
Yeah. Minerva put up a couple of links there for you for the DBAT, so that should be helpful to you. If not,
Minerva.
I had put up the website for TAMS, so it's also posted there. Mary Beth said, do delusions and paranoia from dementia respond to the antipsychotic medications?
Well, that's a great question. And a delusion is a belief that's not real. A hallucination is something you see, hear, or smell that's not correct, that's not actually there. So we call certain behaviors in people with dementia delusion or delusional when they're not really, Glenda. They're just behaviors that are occurring because of brain damage, but we don't have another word, so they're called delusions. If I believe Glenda's out to kill me, that's a delusion because I have a 3-pound brain and I don't have dementia. But people with dementia, because of brain damage, believe that family members or caregivers are stealing from them. Glenda, you've stolen my house, my car, my wallet, my purse, my phone, my comb, my house, my bank account. These are all common things that people with dementia say, and it's because I can't find it. But that is referred to as a delusion. And in most forms of dementia, that's a stage 5 behavior. In Lewy bodies, that's a stage 3 behavior. But that is the delusion that's most common in dementia. And it's not something that would be medicated for. It's just part of the disease process. It's actually a very logical thing the brain is doing. I can't find my purse. My brain says I always put my purse here, but Glenda's here. And now that I think about it, I've always thought Glenda looked suspicious. So I accuse Glenda of stealing my purse. Now, Glenda gets upset and goes home and doesn't realize at 3 a.m, I find my purse in the refrigerator because that's where I put it. Now, I don't remember I put it in the refrigerator. Instead, I think, oh, look how sneaky Glenda is. I better go hide my purse before she comes back again and the game starts all over again. So that's delusion, and that's not medicated. That's just part of brain damage, and it will eventually go away. You want, if your doctor is talking about antipsychotic medication, then what you want is the scale called the Brief Psychiatric Rating Scale. And that's on my website, or you can Google it. It's free to everybody. The Brief Psychiatric Rating Scale. And what that is that's what the doctor should be going through their mind, checking off and grading on your loved one before they're ever given an antipsychotic. Now, understand, we don't like to use antipsychotics in people with dementia. They are a black box drug, but they do at times have to be used. You just want a doctor who starts low and goes up. You don't want a doctor who tries to slam your loved one down. You also have to realize antipsychotics take about 6 weeks to actually reach their medicative state, which is the same amount of time that an antidepressant can take to work. So a lot of times we see antipsychotic medicine used when antidepressant medicine should be used. So you first rule out depression. And to do that, you use something called the Cornell Scale for Depression in Dementia. That's on my website, or you can Google it. The Cornell, like the university, the Cornell Scale for Depression in Dementia. And this allows you, a family caregiver, because who knows them better than you? This allows you, the family caregiver, not to ask them questions about how you're feeling. It allows you to observe them and rank them. And then from that ranking, the grade tells you if you're looking at somebody with depression. And every dementia has depression, so that should be a given, but you may have to fill out the paper and actually take it to the doctor. If an antipsychotic is going to be used, then you want to start with the lowest dosage possible and go to your Brief Psychiatric Rating Scale, because this is sort of how you got to balance the black box thing, the antipsychotic, your loved one, and the disease process. You got to find a way to balance all of this. We can either let the person be like this the last few years of their life and let it just be misery, or we can try something that brings them back down to where they're more like the level that you knew them as. And that's really what the purpose of the antipsychotic is. But take your Brief Psychiatric Rating Scale and read the descriptions and read what they're talking about. Glenda, there's a whole paragraph on hostility. And you would be amazed at how many families realize, I really need to put my person on an antipsychotic or talk to the doctor about something very, very mild, because you're actually witnessing psychotic behavior. You just don't realize that mean, snippy, nasty mother that you've now got, that can be addressed and taken care of, and they can give you back your loving little demented mother. It's just a matter of understanding the scale. And so once you have that scale in your hand, it'll make perfect sense to you. And then you can have a great conversation with the doctor. And what some of you might realize today is, oops, my person shouldn't be on an antipsychotic. And what others of you might realize today is, I need to get this scale and talk to my doctor because I am seeing these things. And you always have to remember, you know this person best. So stick to your guns, stand your ground.
Right. Thanks for that question. And then Anouk says, a person who walks in their sleep when they're young and had bad dreams, can that be a symptom of Lewy body dementia?
No. Some people sleepwalk when they're young. That's actually incredibly rare. It's sort of a urban myth. So it's very, very rare. Children that have done that typically grow out of it, but there's no causation between children walking in their sleep and Lewy bodies.
Okay, well, that's encouraging anyway.
You know, a lot of times families get worried when they hear information about dementia because they may have a grandchild who's on the spectrum or who's been diagnosed as autistic, and they get worried. And to date, there's no relation between autism and Alzheimer's. It's just that if I poke you in that area of the brain, you'll do the same thing. Right?
Yeah, for sure. Anybody else have a question? We've gone a little bit over, which we usually do. You can just unmute your microphone and ask us, or go ahead and put something in the chat box. While you're thinking about that, let me go ahead and tell you what's coming up on the Caregiver Teleconnection. Tomorrow, I'll be back with you at 10 o'clock, probably still having the freezing problems of the screen. I hope that doesn't translate over. With Lucy Verlack, and she's going to be talking about long-term care and when is the right time to be thinking about long-term care and placing someone you're caring for. And that's at 10 o'clock tomorrow. Tam and I'll be back with you next month. We don't have the date yet, but we're going to continue doing the series like we have been now, where we're just having a conversation and answering questions. She and I both think that that's working really well, and I'm hoping it's helpful to you to be able to just get on here and ask whatever problem you're having. Meredith says, my mother gets sad when I show her. Oh, this computer, boy, I'm telling you, wish I were home. My mother, it keeps jumping. That's why I'm saying that. My mother gets sad when I show her pictures of our family over the years. I don't show them to her to quiz her, but just to show her good times. Is that okay to do?
Well, not if it's making her sad. Let's find something else to do with her. I'm a big component of donuts and pie. Pie, happy thing. If you're doing something that's making a dementia person sad, just don't do it anymore. You enjoy those pictures where you can enjoy them, because it can't be fun for you either if you see it making her sad. So let's find something else for her to look at. Find something else to do with her. And it can be literally things like sharing a piece of pie. I think sometimes, especially when our loved ones in a community, you go and then you get overwhelmed. And then as the disease progresses, you reach points where it's just harder and harder to go. Sometimes we do activities and we do too much, and it's okay to stop. And if we do stuff that we can see is visually upsetting the person, then we need to stop doing that thing. Doesn't mean you can stop. You need to look at your pictures all you want to. Those make you feel very happy. So you keep doing that for you, but not if it makes mama upset. Just leave her out.
Yeah. Thank you for all your comments coming back and letting us know that you're finding this helpful. I mean, I think from the response we've been getting, Tam, this is a good format, because I think and it's not that the other format's bad when we're giving education out there on specifics, but this way, if you have something that's really a challenge for you, you can ask it and get an answer in real time. So I think that's helpful. Speaking about answers in real time, you can always call Tam and leave her a message. I always have to get this in because I know she gets a lot of phone calls, but you can call her at area code 254-216-3668. If you have a specific question or a situation you want to talk to her about, leave her a message. She does travel for work and is a busy lady, and she will call you back. But she gives the disclaimer, if you don't hear back from her in a few days, call back again. Is that right, Tam?
Absolutely. I'm about to be on the road for 10 days. So
oh, wow.
Call me back. Yeah,
Wow.
I leave as soon as this is over. So call me back, because I hate it. Glenda, there's been people, it's been a month before I got back to them, and by then what they needed was gone.
Yeah.
So I'm pleased you're not bothering me. If you bother me, I'll send you a bill. Then you'll stop bothering me. But you're not bothering me. I have a unique education, and I'm just happy to share it with you. And if we can do something that makes this horrible journey a little bit easier for you, then we're just really, really glad to do that.
That's right. If you missed some of our sessions with Tam, look on YouTube, look on Google search, go to the Caregiver Teleconnection website. You'll find them there. Just look for Tam and she will be there. It was our pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and I hope you'll join us again next month, and we'll get that date out when they start working on the calendar. Oh, wait a minute. Let me see. Something jumped up. Maybe it's just a thank you. I hope so. It was. Thank you so much, everyone, for your feedback. We appreciate it. Look in your email for a follow-up email on this session. Let us know how you thought we did. If there's a topic you want us to cover, let us know that too, because we're always looking for new topics. Well, I'm going to say goodbye right now and hope to see you next month with Dr. Tam. Have your questions ready. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Take care. Bye, Glenda.
Bye-bye.